gust from the north, then south.
Adjusting windage left, slight holdover.
Target locked.
Got you, Dave!
Your performance today was substandard and disrespectful to the competition. Step back and reevaluate your approach.
I am aware.
The wind gauge on the firing line read 11 miles per hour, gusting unevenly from the left. Mara Vance stood at the very end of the row, rifle case closed at her feet, while 6 finalists ahead of her checked custom scopes worth more than most of their salaries combined. Nobody had looked at her twice all week. Instructor Doyle walked the line with a clipboard he didn't need. He stopped at her station last, the way a man stops at the smallest item on a long list. His eyes moved from her plain stock to her plain face, and he didn't lower his voice. "You'll miss like everyone else," he said. "Might as well sit this one out." The competitors closest to her laughed, low and quick, the kind of laugh that costs nothing and means everything. A foreign observer near the scoring table glanced over, more curious about her silence than the insult itself. Mara didn't answer. She knelt, opened the case, and lifted the rifle out with both hands. Slow, like she was handling something that had already proven itself a long time ago. That was when the radio at the command tent clicked once. A voice came through low, almost private, meant for the officers standing near the tent and not for the line. "Phantom Eye, stand by." 2 older officers near the scoreboard went still. One of them set down his coffee without drinking it. Neither of them said a word, but their faces changed in a way the younger staff around them didn't understand yet. Doyle didn't hear it. He was already walking back toward the favorites, already done with her. He had no idea the radio had just said more about her than his clipboard ever would. The favorites went first, one by one, each call sign read aloud over the loudspeaker like a small ceremony. Captain Reyes from the host team, Lindqvist from the Nordic squad, a silver medalist twice over. Each name pulled a ripple of attention from the crowd gathered behind the rope line. Mara's name, when it had been read that morning, drew nothing. A few claps out of politeness. A woman near the fence had even checked her program twice, as if expecting a mistake in the printing. Her rifle was nothing special to look at. A working stock, scratched at the grip, no custom paint, no sponsor decals. Next to the favorites' rigs, gleaming under the range lights like showroom pieces, it looked like something borrowed from a supply closet. That was the point. She had never needed it to look dangerous. She had only ever needed it to work. Doyle stood near the scoring table now, arms crossed, talking to one of the range officers in the easy tone of a man certain of how the day would end. "Last slot's just a formality," he said, loud enough for the row behind him to hear. "Fill the bracket, keep the sponsors happy." The range officer, a woman named Patel who had run this line for 9 years, didn't laugh with him. She glanced once at the command tent, where Colonel Hobbs stood with his arms folded and his eyes fixed on nothing in particular, the way a man looks when he is listening harder than his face lets on. Patel had heard the radio call too. She didn't know who Phantom Eye was, but she had been doing this long enough to know that a silence like that, from officers like that, was never about nothing. Out on the line, the wind shifted again, kicking dust off the berm in a thin gray sheet. Somewhere past the 1100-meter mark, the target frame sat waiting, small as coins from this distance, indifferent to reputation. Mara checked her data card once, then put it away. She wasn't watching the favorites. She was watching the flags. By the third favorite's turn, Doyle had warmed to his own joke. He repeated it to anyone near enough to listen, polishing it like he expected it to outlive the day. "Formality," he said again. "Some people just like standing in line." A few of the younger staff laughed along, the way people laugh when an authority figure wants them to. Patel didn't. She had gone quiet, watching the command tent more than the targets now. Lindqvist stepped up to the 1100-meter line, settled into position, and took the wind call everyone expected him to take. The shot broke clean. The miss was small, technically, 8 inches left of center, but at this range, small didn't matter. The crowd exhaled in a single disappointed breath. Doyle clapped anyway, the kind of applause that says "nice try" without meaning either word. "Tough conditions today," he announced to the row. Anyone who hits center in this wind earns it. He didn't look at Mara when he said it. He didn't need to. Everyone understood who the sentence wasn't including. She stood near her station, rifle still resting in its open case, watching the flag at 900 meters twist hard one way, hold, then twist back. The flag at the far berm did something different. A half-second later, like the wind itself was arguing with itself across the range. Most shooters read one flag. She was reading the gap between two. The radio at the command tent clicked again, and this time the voice came through slightly less private, slightly more clipped, like the speaker had decided the moment deserved a little more weight. Confirm. Phantom Eye is in position 3. Hold the board. One of the foreign observers, a colonel from the visiting delegation, turned his head sharply toward the tent. He didn't know the name, but he knew the tone of a man giving an order disguised as a question, and that tone never showed up for nobody. He looked at Mara again. This time, he didn't look away. The second favorite's turn went worse than the first. Captain Reyes settled into position with the kind of confidence cameras love, called his wind hold out loud for the benefit of the broadcast feed, and sent his shot 4 inches wide at the moment the far flag died and reversed. He didn't curse. He just stood up slowly, jaw tight, and walked back from the line without looking at anyone. The scoreboard updated. 2 misses. 2 favorites humbled by the same gust nobody could predict. Doyle's commentary thinned out after that. He still talked, but quieter now. The kind of quiet that comes from a man recalculating his own confidence in real time without admitting it. Near the command tent, Colonel Hobbs hadn't moved in several minutes. He stood with his hands behind his back, watching the line the way a man watches a fuse he already knows the length of. "Sir," one of the younger officers said carefully. "Who's Phantom Eye?" Hobbs didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat, almost bored. The tone of a man who had decided a long time ago not to explain certain things twice. "Someone who used to not exist on paper," he said. "Watch the line." The young officer wrote nothing down. There was nothing to write down yet, but he didn't ask again, and he didn't look away from position 3 for the rest of the round. Out past the berm, the wind kicked up again, sharper this time, carrying a thin smell of dust and gun oil down the firing line. Mara stood with her rifle across her forearms, eyes on the flags, waiting her turn the way a woman waits for something she has already done 100 times before. The third favorite, a young marksman from the host team named Calder, took longer than the others to settle. He checked his data card twice, adjusted his sling, and finally called his hold under his breath instead of out loud. His shot found the paper, barely, low and right of center. Not a miss by the rule book, but not the kind of hit that silences a crowd either. A scattering of polite applause followed, the kind reserved for effort rather than result. 3 favorites down. None of them had broken the wind the way the morning briefing promised they would. Doyle crossed his arms tighter and said nothing for once. Patel, still at the scoring table, allowed herself the smallest exhale, like a woman watching a theory prove itself whether she wanted it to or not. I have seen rooms like this before, the kind that build their confidence on reputation instead of conditions. I have never once seen that confidence survive real wind. Colonel Hobbs finally moved, walking the few steps from the tent to the edge of the scoring area, his eyes fixed on the data sheet in Patel's hands rather than the targets themselves. He read it once, nodded once, and said something to the radio operator beside him, too quiet for the row to hear. The young officer who had asked about Phantom Eye watched him do it and understood, without being told, that something had just been decided. On the line, 2 more shooters remained before Mara's turn. Neither of them looked confident anymore. The 4th shooter missed entirely, the round burying itself somewhere in the berm well wide of the target. The 5th landed a marginal hit, the kind that counted on paper but satisfied no one watching. 5 favorites. 1 clean center hit between all of them. The crowd's energy had changed by now. Less excitement, more confusion. The particular restlessness of people who came expecting a coronation and got an audit instead. Somewhere in the stands, someone asked loudly why the wind hadn't been factored into the bracket seating, and nobody answered. Doyle walked back toward his original spot near Mara's station. arms still crossed, but the certainty in his shoulders had thinned considerably. He didn't repeat his joke this time. The foreign colonel who had turned at the radio call earlier leaned toward the officer beside him and asked a question in a language the Rao couldn't follow. Whatever the answer was, his expression didn't relax. Then the loudspeaker clicked on for the final time before the last slot. Final shooter, position 3, Mara Vance. No call sign came through the public speaker, just the name, flat and procedural, exactly the way it had been all week. But at the command tent, the radio clicked once more, and this time Colonel Hobbs picked it up himself. Phantom eyes on glass. The applause that should have followed her name didn't come. Instead, the line went quieter than it had been all week. The particular silence of people who suddenly suspect they have been watching the wrong shooter for 6 days straight. Mara walked to position 3 without hurrying. She set her case down, knelt, and began the same routine she had run every round. The same routine nobody had bothered to film. You have seen the insult. Now tell me the exact line that crossed it. Doyle stood a few feet away, close enough to see her hands, but too far now to say anything to her directly. He glanced once at the command tent, then back at her, and for the first time all week, his expression carried something other than certainty. Patel approached with the windlog, handed it to the range officer without a word, and stepped back to where she could see both the targets and the woman about to shoot at them. At 1,200 meters, the flags told 2 different stories. The near one held steady. The far one twisted hard, died, and twisted again in the opposite direction, a pattern that had broken 5 shooters already that morning. Mara checked the flags once, then didn't check them again. She had already read what she needed. Behind her, the foreign colonel said something low to the officer beside him, and this time, the row caught one word clearly enough to repeat it later. Legend. She lowered herself into position the way she had 1,000 times before, in places that had never made it onto a broadcast feed. The mat beneath her knees was thin and worn. Range issue, nothing like the padded setups the favorites had used. For half a second, something flickered behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the targets in front of her. A different range, colder air, a spotter's voice she hadn't heard in 3 years, calling corrections she still remembered exactly. She didn't let it linger. That door closed as quickly as it had opened. Doyle's voice, when it finally came, had lost the easy mockery from before. "You don't have to take this shot," he said, almost gently, like a man trying to undo something he no longer wanted credit for. "Conditions are bad. Nobody would blame you." Mara didn't look up. "I know," she said. It was the only thing she had said to him all week. Behind the rope line, the crowd had gone fully silent now. The kind of silence that has weight, that people lean into without realizing they're doing it. Colonel Hobbs stood at the edge of the scoring area, radio still in hand, watching her settle behind the rifle with the stillness of a man who already knew exactly what he was about to witness. The first thing she did was breathe, slow and even, the way someone breathes when they've trained their body to forget it's nervous. Her cheek found the stock the same way it always had, the worn wood meeting her face like an old agreement neither of them needed to renew. Her hands didn't move quickly. They moved correctly, the bolt sliding home with a sound too quiet for the microphones to catch, but loud enough for the Rao closest to her to hear it and go still. On the inside of her left wrist, just visible where her sleeve had ridden up, a thin white scar caught the light. Nobody on the line knew what it was from. Nobody asked. I know what a room sounds like when respect arrives late. It never arrives loud. It arrives like this, in the silence right before someone proves a point they never bothered to argue out loud. She found the FAR flag first, watched it die, watched the gap of nothing that followed, watched the near flag answer half a second later, in a way the favorites had read as agreement and was actually argument. Most shooters split the difference between 2 flags. She didn't split anything. She read the conversation between them, the half-second lag that told her exactly where the air would be when the bullet arrived, not where it was now. Her finger found the trigger guard, not the trigger, not yet. The range went still in a way ranges rarely do. Even the broadcast crew, usually murmuring corrections to each other through headsets, had stopped talking. Mara's breathing slowed further, settling into the gap between heartbeats where the body holds itself naturally quiet. The FAR flag died again, exactly on schedule, exactly the way she had clocked it for the last 6 shooters who had all read it wrong. She didn't adjust for the wind she could see. She adjusted for the wind she knew was coming, the half-second delay that had buried 5 shots already that morning into ground that didn't deserve them. Her finger moved from the guard to the trigger, slow, deliberate, no more rushed than her breathing had been. At the command tent, Colonel Hobbs lifted the radio one more time. He didn't key it. He just held it, thumb resting near the switch, the way a man holds something he might need to explain very soon. Doyle had stopped pretending to watch the scoreboard. He was watching her hands now. The same hands he'd dismissed as belonging to a formality. And something in his expression had started to look less like doubt and more like dread. The FAR flag twisted hard, died, and in the half-second before it reversed, the range went so quiet that the click of the safety coming off was the loudest sound on the field. The shot broke clean, a single sound that seemed to arrive before the recoil did, the kind of report that doesn't echo so much as it simply ends a conversation. For a full second, nobody moved. The downrange spotter, watching through a scope steadier than his own hands had any right to be, said nothing into his radio. He was waiting for the target to confirm what his eyes had already told him. The FAR flag, the one that had ruined 5 shooters that morning, twisted exactly the way Mara had read it would, exactly half a second after she had already accounted for it. Doyle's arms had uncrossed without him seeming to notice. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, staring down range like a man watching a verdict get read before the judge had finished the sentence. Patel's pen had stopped moving on her clipboard. Colonel Hobbs, radio still in hand, exhaled once through his nose, the closest thing to a reaction the row had seen from him all day. The foreign colonel said the word again, quieter this time, almost to himself. Legend, 1,200 meters downrange. The target frame held perfectly still, waiting the half-second it always took for confirmation to travel back across that much open air. The confirmation came back over the spotter's radio in 4 words, flat and procedural, the way the range always reported a hit, center mass, dead center. The crowd's reaction arrived a half-second behind the words, the way thunder arrives after lightning, a single collective sound that wasn't quite a cheer and wasn't quite disbelief, but sat somewhere uncomfortably between both. Doyle didn't say anything. He couldn't have, even if he'd wanted to. His mouth had opened slightly, the posture of a man rehearsing an apology he hadn't built yet. Colonel Hobbs finally keyed the radio, and this time he didn't lower his voice for anyone. Confirmed. Fanaman's just put the hardest shot of this championship dead center in conditions that broke 5 other finalists. He paused, letting the words land on the row the way they'd already landed on him days ago. Some of you have been asking who that is. Now you know what the name means. The young officer who had asked the question earlier didn't say anything. He just looked at Mara, still kneeling at position 3, rifle settling back against her shoulder like nothing unusual had happened at all. Patel allowed herself a small, private smile, the kind reserved for people who had quietly suspected the truth the whole time. Doyle finally looked at Mara directly, for the first time all week, treating her like she belonged on the same line as everyone else. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't need to. The silence behind him had already said it for him. The applause, when it finally came, wasn't loud. It was the kind that builds slowly, starting from the officers near the command tent and spreading outward through the crowd like something catching rather than something announced. Doyle stepped back from his spot near her station, putting distance between himself and the line he had drawn all week, without realizing it would close this fast. He looked at the scoreboard, then at her, then back at the scoreboard, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something he could still argue with. They didn't. I do not think fear was the worst thing in that room. Pride was. Pride is patient. It waits until the exact moment it cannot afford to be wrong, and then it loses anyway, in front of everyone it spent all week performing for. Patel walked over to update the official log, writing Mara's name into the record with the same steady hand she'd used all week. Except this time, the entry would mean something different to everyone who read it later. The foreign colonel approached the rope line, not to speak to Mara directly, but to say something to Hobbs that made the older officer nod once, briefly, before returning his attention to the woman still kneeling at position 3. Doyle stood alone near the scoring table, arms uncrossed now, looking like a man recalculating an entire week in real time. Mara stood finally, lifting the rifle with the same unhurried care she'd shown all week. She didn't raise it in celebration. She simply broke it open, checked the chamber, and set it back in its case, the way someone closes a door they never needed to slam. The favorites who had missed earlier watched her from a short distance, none of them speaking. Reyes was the first to move, walking over with his hand already extended before he seemed to decide what he wanted to say with it. "That wind call?" he said. "Nobody reads it like that. I had time to learn it," Mara said. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't meant to be one. Lindqvist, still pale from his own miss, nodded at her once, the kind of nod that costs a competitor more than applause ever could. Doyle remained where he was, several feet back, watching the small crowd form around her without him in it. When he finally stepped forward, it wasn't to speak to Mara. It was to speak to Hobbs, low and careful. "I didn't know," he said. "No," Hobbs answered, not unkindly, but without softening it either. "You didn't ask." Behind them, the scoreboard held her name at the top of the column for the first time all week, exactly where it had belonged the entire time. By the time the closing ceremony began, the story had already outrun the scoreboard. Competitors who hadn't spoken to her all week found reasons to stand near her. The foreign colonel asked, through an interpreter, if she would consider training observers from his delegation. She said she'd think about it, which from her was as close to a yes as anyone there had heard all day. Colonel Hobbs found her near the equipment tent afterward, away from the cameras still circling the favorites. "You could have let the radio call do the talking," he said. "You didn't need the shot to prove it." "The radio call doesn't shoot," Mara said. "I do. If you want this channel to keep producing stories with weight, heart, and precision, use the pinned comment now." Hobbs allowed himself something close to a smile. "Command's going to want a statement about Phantom Eye's status. Officially, you still don't exist." "Good," she said. "Keeps things simple." She picked up her rifle case, the same scratched, unremarkable case it had always been, and walked toward the parking area without waiting for anyone to walk with her. Behind her, the scoreboard still held her name at the top, and for the first time all week, nobody laughed at anything near position 3. 3 weeks later, a new recruit at a training facility 2 states away asked her instructor why the wind drill on the whiteboard was called the Vance correction. The instructor, a woman who had been in the program longer than most, didn't smile when she answered, "Because someone proved the math wrong in front of a stadium full of people who should have known better," she said, and then went home without telling anyone her first name. Nobody at that championship ever got an official answer about Phantom Eye. The file, if it existed at all, stayed exactly where Hobbs had said it would. Nowhere anyone could read it. But Doyle remembered. Every time he ran a new line of finalists through wind drills, he stopped checking equipment first. He checked hands. He checked stillness. He had learned, the expensive way, that the loudest confidence in the room is rarely the one worth trusting. I have watched silence win more fights than shouting ever did. I do not expect that lesson to get any easier to learn for the next man standing where Doyle stood. Some rooms only recalculate once, and only because somebody finally forced them to. Somewhere, on a range that didn't show up on any public schedule, a woman with a scratched rifle case adjusted her stance, read 2 flags arguing with each other, and didn't wait for anyone to ask her name before she fired. She never needed the applause. She only ever needed the wind, to be honest.